1993 Yamaha TW. It's old, it's got problems, nothing major, easy to fix. It's been a good bike for 20 plus years, almost 30 now we're going on. But this one's gonna have to go down the road as we've got some bigger, funner projects about to come into the garage here. But this will be the first one for SLC builds. So since I don't have one of those handy milk crates that are the best thing for jacking these things up so I can get pressure off the front end, don't have a motorcycle stand either, we got to get this thing hanging up there. So we're going to hook a couple straps here to the rafters, strap them on the handlebars, pick it up off the ground, and then we'll start pulling the front end apart to get to the fork seals. Now that we've got the front end just off the ground enough, we'll start loosening the bolts here. We got the primary, this front axle nut, actually a bolt that goes all the way through. It's going to be a 17 millimeter. We'll break that loose. After we take the cotter pin out of the other side there, we can get that nut off, we can get the bolt removed, get the front tire off. This has got front drum brakes on it, so for this one we'll just loosen the cable there, back the cable off out so it's out of the way, and then we'll take off that 10 millimeter nut that holds the cable to the front fork. So here, first we're going to get the cotter pin out of this castle nut here. One of my favorite ways to do it is just grab a set of dikes here. Straighten the cotter pin out best you can, just enough to wiggle it up. Then you grab your dikes on the other end, and then you can just grab, pry, and pull and just walk it right out. I found that's always the easiest way to get the cotter pins out. Makes the job really simple. Next, we'll take the front brake cable. We're just going to loosen this nut a little bit here. Give us enough slack here. Then pop the cable out of place, or out of the mount. So there's a couple different ways you can remove the cable from these drum brakes. One, you can loosen it, try and get enough slack to get this to release off of here. That generally requires you taking the brake cable off from up above. Another way is you can just take it off down below here, but this has an orientation, so if you are going to take it off of this, you need to make sure you mark the orientation before you loosen this and pop it off so that it can go in the exact same spot, since it is a splined piece onto a little gear in there that then actuates the brake mechanism inside the brake. So what you'll need to do in order to get this out is this nut right here slides into a little recess in the spline here. So in order to get this off, you got to pull the nut and bolt all the way off, and this should just pop off, come off the splines there, nice and easy. One thing to note is be careful not to let your brake pad wear indicator, which is this little point and this little section on the drum here. Don't let that come all the way off, because you want to keep that orientation. Kind of gives you an indication of where your drum brakes are as far as where and when you're going to need to change those. If it gets outside of this range here, then you know it's time to replace the brakes. Now with that loose enough, I was able to pull it off just enough to get the front brake cable detached from the arm, and then just let that sit back in place so we can start to take the front wheel off. Before we get to the front wheel, we will have to pop the speedometer cable out of it here. It's just a little kind of rectangular ring clip. You can squeeze it with a pair of pliers, pop that out, and the whole cable should come up and out of place. So with this little clip up and out of place, it's simply just wiggling and sliding the speedometer cable up and out. Now with the cable and everything loose here, let's go ahead and take this front axle nut. So we got the brake cable kind of released here. We got the speedometer cable released. We're going to take this axle nut off. So this is a 22 millimeter on this side on the castle nut, and then on the other side, if you need to hold it, that's a 17 millimeter for the main axle bolt that comes through here. Now that we've taken the main front axle nut out. The whole tire just removes. That leaves us with taking the front fender off, loosening the 12mm bolts, and then the 10mm on the bolt on the side up here to have the shock struts or the forks come out of the front of the bike. Now with the Allen bolts removed, the fender should just lift up and out. Slide the cable up and through the fender there. Next, we'll move these four 12mm bolts that are holding the forks in place. The 10mm bolt up here, and the fork should drop right out. Before loosening the 10mm bolts on the side, it's always a good idea just to break these loose a little bit if you can before you get them on the bench. Just makes them easier to come out while it's still all bolted to the frame. So my top nuts here, they were a little bit tight, 19mm. I had to hit them just with a little bit of air, but now they're plenty loose. I can get them off if I need to on the bench. So with a little bit of loosening of the 12mm, take a screwdriver and just pry that ever so slightly. Then come up, loosen your 10mm here, and that should allow the shock strut to just go ahead and drop right out. Maybe with a little coercing on this one. That's where the registration stickers used to be every year. So we're going to have to slide this one out using two hands. What I would advise against is definitely don't put your registration decals on the upper side of your fork here, because getting them to slide through this fork mount was extremely difficult. These are pretty tight and you have to pry this open while simultaneously trying to pull the fork down, and if you have any residue or stickers left, that fork is not going to want to go down through that hole. So if you register and decal your bike, don't put it on the upper side of the fork. What you don't want is all this residue sitting on your fork tube when you're trying to slide it out through the fork mount there. It's going to cause you a huge headache, as it just did me here. So remove the boots here, loosen this hose clamp here at the top boot clamp, and then release the boot from the bottom strut housing there, and simply just slide it off. So you can see these boots are full of oil. These things have been leaking for years. The bike's really been sitting for about 10 years, hasn't been ridden much except out in the circle there. So what I do to relieve the bottom part of the boot here is get a screwdriver. You can use a plastic trim tool, something like that, just to initially get it to lift up off there. And once it's off, you can rotate it around, pops and slides right off. And again, slide the whole boot assembly off, which is a pain on these ones because all the sticker crud that's been on those. We'll set those off to the side. And what I am going to do later on down, take some steel wool, a little bit of brake clean or carb clean, clean all this sticker residue off. And this looks like it's been sitting there for a long time, maybe a little bit of rust there. But we'll get those all cleaned up as we tear them apart. So before removing this top nut here, the one that you should have broken loose on the bike, you want to get an oil drain pan, because once we break it loose, we're going to dump as much oil as we can out of these things. You don't really need to pump them like you would if you're just changing the oil, because all the fork oil is going to be drained out of these anyway as we tear the bottom half of the tube apart here to get the rest of the oil out before we can get to the seals there. As we pop that off, that's the top nut. See how much oil we get out of these. So you've got your upper spacer here. Lay that off to the side. This is your spring cap that your upper spacer rides on. You can pull your spring out or keep getting all the rest of the oil out of it here. Go ahead and pull the spring up and out. Bring this off to the side. Drain the rest of the oil out of it. At this point you can pump it a little bit to get more oil out. There is going to be oil on the upper side of it, so you're pumping it through the orifice tube there. Get it from the, well, bottom side on this case, but the way I've got it leaning. And that'll pump most of the rest of the oil out of it. That way when you tear it apart, you're not making a mess all over your bench. Alright, that'll be good for now. So to get the fork tube and the seals out of here, there's a little spring, retainer spring that sits down in there. You can just use a flathead screwdriver and get around the edges and start prying it up and walk it just out and around from the fork seal there. And everything should slide and pop out from there. Well, the next step was to remove this bottom bolt out of here, or Allen head. But I seem to have lost an adapter tool that I need so I can hit it with my impact. So fair warning, if you want to make any mechanic frustrated, just make one of his favorite tools disappear and have him wander around for an hour looking for it so he can't get the job done. To be continued. So back to my original point about losing a tool. 2 hours later I'm back and I found it. So just a little something here on these forks. Don't do what I did. When they're still tight before you've gotten everything loosened up, definitely want to loosen this lower bolt here. So I broke it loose, got the inner tube spinning a whole lot, so at that point I couldn't get it loosened up. So what you'd want to do before you remove this and get it loosened up is, while it's still pretty much all together and things are tight, you want to hit this with the impact wrench. It's not going to come off just turning like that. It's just going to loosen things up on the inside and just spin in there. If that happens and you get to that point where it spins inside, what you can do is go to the local hardware store and get a 1/2 inch 13 by 1 3/4 inch course. It's just a coupling nut that they use on all thread pipes and stuff like that. That coupling nut sits perfectly on a 19mm socket. As you can see here, it sits right perfect there. I tape it on so then you can go down the inner tube here, and there's actually an open end kind of joint that this slides down into, locks it into place, and then you can break the bolt loose on the other end of it. So that is if you do it like I did and loosen it too much. As you can see, this is coming out, fits in there perfect. This is the inner orifice tube, or I'll have to look at the name again, but we call them orifice tubes in landing gear. But you pretty much have a 12 point, but the 6-point 19mm fits in there perfect enough just to lock it in place, so you can get the bolt out of it from the other end, which this bolt screws in right there. So if you don't break it loose, this whole piece just turns in there as an assembly, and you'll never get this loose without locking this end of it in place. So we'll try and do this one without locking it in place before we take it apart and see how that works. So next, now that we've got the metering pin orifice tube pulled out there, should be able to just slide this main, the fork tube here, right up and out. Just pop the seals right through the seals, and the whole piece comes out. Now on the bottom end here, we've got a couple of washers. See if I can pop those out here. So you've actually got this little spacer that's going to go right here on the end of the metering pin. And there is a small spring all the way up inside here. We'll kind of dump this out. So that's the spring at the end. That's all we've got there. So I'm going to just go ahead and leave that spring in place down on the bottom there. Lay everything aside. Then next, we'll tackle getting the two seals out of the fork here. These have been leaking for 10 plus years. It's time to get those replaced. So what I generally do, seals like this, they're pretty easy to get out most of the time. So I just got an old broken tip screwdriver, so not to mar the seal surface at all on the outside. You can just get slightly on the back side of the seal, and just give it a little pop. Generally, they come right out without too much of a hassle there. You just want to be gentle enough with it that you're not scratching this surface that the outside of the seal would sit on. This one's a little bit tighter in there. Definitely more difficult to get out there. Okay, so this one just took a little more working. Getting under there, get a lot more pressure, and then it pops sideways there. So lower seal, definitely a little more difficult to pull out than bigger seal. It's a lot thicker width on it there, a lot more area to get it out. We'll just clean this up, get the new seals in there, and put everything back together. What I'm doing, just using a little bit of brake clean here, spray it on, and that sticker residue just comes right off. Kind of eats right through it there. Makes the job easy on this side of it. This down here though, probably going to have to hit with this steel wool, being gentle not to really tear up the fork tube here. Clean up the rest of the sticker residue with the steel wool. Really mild. And there goes my spring. That's why you take the spring out. But as you can see, just polishes up the surface where all that residue is really nicely. Well, I just ordered my kit. 2 fork seals, upper and lower. Just got them here. There's the part number, company that I ordered them from. They're all balls fork seals. Wiper kit, one color, one size fitment. I think they were about $30, $35 for the 2 seals, so really not too bad. Get these replaced if you do it yourself. So first things first, get this seal to drive it into there. Find a socket that fits that exact size. I don't have a seal driver for these. Sockets generally work really good if you're in a pinch. So what I found here is just an impact, somewhat of a thinner wall, 32mm socket. The important thing is that the socket itself can slide freely into the tube there, and then your wiper lip here for the seal you want to make sure can fit inside of the socket itself. You don't want to damage this lip here. That's really what's kind of critical for sealing onto the shock strut itself, as well as this inner one here. So you don't want to risk damaging either side of the wipers here. Just make sure that it fits perfect on the support structure of the seal, which is this outer part of the seal, and then you can hammer them in place. We'll just get it set in there gently, get our socket. Then with the biggest hammer you have, or not, you don't need a big hammer. Just something lightly enough to tap her down in place. Now that we have the lower seal in there, we'll go ahead and take the top seal and drive it in right above it. And actually the top seal just kind of sits right in place, nice and easy. And then we'll just put the ring in there, the ring clip, keep the seal back in place, and continue with reassembly. So this ring just kind of goes around, works itself around, pops back down into the groove there. Just sits in there just like that. That keeps the seals in place. Now what we're going to go ahead and do, we'll assemble this, but before we put the tube back in there, we want to lubricate the inside of these rings with a little bit of the fork oil. So we'll go ahead and grab that, lube these up a little bit, and then we'll slide everything together, put the metering tube back down in there, the spacer on the bottom, the springs in there. So essentially everything will go back together just like this inside of the shock tube. So I went with the Maxima Racing Oils fork oil for this. Again, it's a 10 weight. You don't really want to deviate from that unless you're a really heavy rider or an extremely light rider. This will pretty much do everything you need as you're going back, tuning these, getting them how you want. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this, lubricate the seal there, and then reassemble everything. So next what we're going to do is install this bottom bolt here. It torques to 22 foot-pounds. You can go ahead and set this to 22 foot-pounds. So we can torque the bottom bolt here. So it does call for some blue Loctite on the threads here during installation. The shop manual does say replace these every time. I don't have a new one, so I'll reuse it. We'll see how that goes. Most copper crush washers like this should always be replaced. Very similar to the drain pan washers on any car. But we'll take our chances here. It's a quick rebuild. Alright, put our stop in the end here so I can tighten things up. That all the way in there. Alright. Don't need a lot of blue Loctite, just enough to get the job done. A couple drops should be good. And just a couple drops there. So I just put it down the threads there a little bit. It'll work its way in as you thread it in. Fine threads. They'll go forever. Getting tighter there. Should be clicking any second. There we go, one click. Two for good measure. Alright. Bottom bolt locked in place there. Set that aside. And there's our tool. Put that back out. So at this point, we're ready to fill this shock, seal it up, put this one back on the bike. So with that, we've got this handy little measuring tool. It calls for the shock strut to be fully compressed and should be 135 millimeters from the opening end down to the fluid level there. So that's the measurement the manual calls for. So we'll go ahead and set this right at 130, 135, and that'll be our level to pull the fluid back out from. If I can see this, there we go. 130. This one's got a 130 and a 140, so we'll go just slightly more than the 130 there. So reading, perfect. So then do, we'll just dump oil down into this. We'll put this up here, and then I'll just suck out any excess oil, and then we'll be exactly at 135 millimeters. Let's go ahead and do that now. So this one's a 93, and the manual calls for 8.05 fluid ounces, or 135 millimeters, top of the strut. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill it, and then suck the fluid out as needed. This is 33 fluid ounces, so about a quarter of it should do. The other thing you want to do, make sure you stroke the full length down to the stop, and that gets the fluid down on the other side of the metering pin or orifice tube. Make sure you've got the right level of fluid there. Alright, another thing to note when you do this, make sure the spring is out of this, because it'll take up volume and give you a false reading. Let's see. I can kind of see the fluid there. Let's see if I'm at the right level. Now you can see fluid coming out. We'll just suck this until you hear the air. So at that point, we're right at 135 millimeters. Handy tool, you can get these anywhere for about 30-35 bucks. Make the job really simple. Alright, next step, we'll go ahead and reinstall the spring and the internals here. Make sure your spring's good and clean. I washed this one earlier. Just drop that down in the tube. Don't forget your spring cap here. That goes in between. And you have your spacer on top. A lot of people will get rid of the spacer and go with a spring that goes all the way up this. Gives them better dampening. Since I don't ride this bike a lot and it's mostly street use lately, I'm just going to leave it in the stock configuration. Alright, that's in there. Perfect. Now some people will look at this and be like, oh man, I can't install anything. Don't forget, pull your shock strut all the way back up, and then stuff drops in nice and easy. Last but not least, we'll install our top cap here. Push down just a little bit. Turn things just so it starts to get a little bite on it. And we'll do there. One thing, you don't want to crank this super tight just yet until you get it back on the bike. And I'll show you why we do that later. Alright. One fork tube, ready to go. I'll do the other one real quick, and then we'll reinstall everything back on the bike. So now that we've got the two forks installed, we want to set the top height adjustment right here. Now the manual calls for 6 millimeter or 0.24 inches from not the top of the nut here, but from the top of the actual fork tube. So what I'm going to do is take this here, try and measure it as close as I can as I tap it down into place. So I'm going to set that, come back and check it, and we'll see where we're at. Alright, now I've got both sides set to 0.24 inches. Let's just double check and verify. Both sides are the same here. just about 0.24 to the shock of the fork tube. Some people will set it to the top of the nut. Either way is fine. It will adjust the handling characteristics of the bike a little bit, but whatever you get used to or you feel comfortable riding, that's just fine. We'll double check this side too. And there, we're dead on from side to side. Next, we'll go ahead and lock these, torque these, and I'll give you the torque specs in just a second. So each of these call for 17 foot-pounds on both sides, as well as the upper clamp bolt here. Once this one's tight, then we'll tighten that top cap bolt, just because there's a potential to distort the threads and everything if you tighten the other one first. So we'll clamp it down, then tighten that one, make sure it's good to go. So now we have everything back on. It's time to start reinstalling the front wheel, the brake cables. We'll button everything up. Did torque these last top ones to 17 foot-pounds as well. That's what the manual calls for. Now we'll get the rest back together. So I've gone ahead now, reinstalled the front fender. So this one comes apart different than the newer bikes. Since this is a 93, it's got the Allen heads or Allen bolts in there. So put those back in, gone ahead and rerouted the speedometer cable, got my brake cable reattached. And since this is a front drum, the easier way to do this one is to pull the drum out of the wheel before you start install everything. That way you can get your cable back on. I definitely took this apart the hard way by taking the brake lever off there, then taking the cable. Forgot that you can just pull the brake caliper out, or the drums, leave everything assembled, and then just slide it together when you put the wheel on, which I'll show you here in just a minute. As you can see here, the drum just slides right into there, good and clean, nothing scored up, and we'll get things back together. So the last thing we'll need to do is tighten the castle nut here. So it's a 21 millimeter on this side and a 19 millimeter on this side. The torque spec calls for 65 foot-pounds or 90 Newton meters. So we'll go ahead and torque that right now. The last thing to do on these older ones with the castle nut, make sure you put the cotter pin back in. The newer bikes, I believe, just have a lock nut on them that you torque to a different spec. But on the older ones, 65 foot-pounds, castle nut, and don't forget the cotter pin. So the last thing that I had to do was adjust the front brake free play in the handle by turning these until the adjustment up here. So from this center line here, you should have anywhere from about 0.08 to 160 thou of free movement. So from just a little bit to slightly more than 1/8 of an inch. And that's about where I'm at on the free pedal, or the brake free play there. So from that center line to that point from there should be about 1/8 of an inch, roughly. The final step now will just be to set the boot height here, just against the steering tree. Tighten up the screws, and then we'll lower it back down on the ground.